Hey, what's going on everybody? Welcome to the first episode of Valorant Academy. It's a YouTube series where we'll be breaking down Valorant to a fundamental level and teaching you the core concepts that you need to know to play your best. For this week's episode, we'll be taking a look at mouse sensitivity. Let's get started by navigating to our computer's mouse settings and disabling enhanced pointer precision. This will disable mouse acceleration, which means our pointer will no longer speed up or slow down based on how quickly we move our mouse. While Valorant already ignores this setting by default, turning this setting off out of game is important because it ensures we won't build a bad habit of moving our mouse faster instead of further to flick further distances. It's far easier to develop muscle memory for the distance our mouse moves rather than the speed our mouse moves. Now, let's head in game to our Valorant settings. Navigate to raw input buffer and make sure this is turned on. This setting is intended to improve performance for players with mice with a polling rate of 8 kHz or higher, but I found that my FPS stutters uncontrollably with the setting off, so I just leave it on. Now let's get into DPI and sensitivity. While there is no set rule for what your DPI should be, the majority of players tend to play on either 400, 800, or 1600 DPI. But what's the difference? And should you go lower or higher? Aside from lower DPI being slower, and higher DPI being faster, your DPI also affects the sensor latency on your mouse. Optimum Tech actually has an entire video on this subject, so if you're interested in learning more, I'll leave a link to his channel in the description. Taking a look at some of his test results, we can see that there's a consistently higher input latency on lower DPI settings. This is because on lower DPIs, the mouse is actually reading fewer inputs per inch, which means it takes longer for the mouse to realize that it's moving. So what does this mean for us? To put it plain and simple, if we want to achieve the snappiest response in Valorant, we're going to want to choose a higher DPI like 1600 and a lower sense in-game. Finally, let's talk about mouse sensitivity. First, let's go over when you would use a high sensitivity versus a low sensitivity. Faster sensitivities are usually better for games where long, fast flicks and tracking are necessary. Games where you're worried about all 360 degrees around you all the time. For example, Overwatch or Apex Legends. Lower sensitivities are great for when you only need to microflick to enemies and when they tend to come from angles that you can reliably predict with crosshair placement. In the case of Valorant, where crosshair placement and positioning are the name of the game, players see the biggest benefit by going with the lower sensitivity. So what sensitivity is right for you? Well, let's go to the pros. We can see that the vast majority of professionals fall within the 240 to 320 eDPI range. While this range is not for everybody, it's a great starting point for players who are looking to find their sense but have no idea where to begin. So how do you find what sensitivity you're comfortable on? Let's start by picking 3 eDPI values. 1 high, 1 medium, and 1 low. Divide these values by your mouse DPI to find your in-game sensitivity for each tier. Now, let's hop into the Valorant range and try them out. We're gonna head to the flying bots and track one of these stationary bots while strafing side to side. Ideally, we want our crosshair to stay locked onto the center of the target as we do long strafes back and forth. Next, we can test our flicks by aiming back and forth quickly between the 4 bots. Take note of how you feel about the sensitivity you're on, and then repeat the process with the other 2 sensitivities. Once you've tested all 3, cross out the sensitivity that you liked the least. Then, we're going to find the middle sensitivity in between the 2 remaining sensitivities, and we're going to repeat the whole process until we get down to a range small enough that we can no longer tell the difference. At that point, you just pick whichever one of the 3 that you like the most. And there you go! You've now found your sense. Bear in mind that this value can change depending on how your arm is positioned, how you're sitting, and your posture. The important thing for us is to minimize the things that can change and impact the way we play. Keeping our sense, posture, and arm positioning the same is an important step in making sure we're not suddenly playing poorly because we no longer feel comfortable in our setup. And that's it for episode 1. Tune in next week to episode 2, where we'll be going over everything you need to know about crosshairs, including what the best crosshair size is. See you then!